Thank you. Dan spoke about economic inequality. I'm going to talk about something even more controversial, biologic and genetic inequality. Have people seen the movie Gattaca? Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke? I think the movie was made about 15 or 20 years ago, where they talk about a futuristic technology where the husband and wife can use new genetic tools to create babies that have the best features of both the husband and the wife. The future is here. So what I'm going to talk to you today about are the challenges that some of these incredible new genetic tools that are becoming available pose to us as a society, and also some of the moral and economic challenges they pose to parents as they decide whether they should use these tools or not. And this is particularly relevant for families who have deadly genetic familial disorders running in their family history. So let's just take one example. People have heard of Alzheimer's disease? I think everybody is yes. So Alzheimer's, like many other chronic diseases, comes in two forms. There is a late onset, sporadic form of Alzheimer's disease for which we have not yet identified all of the causes. We know one particular gene increases the risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease, and that gene is called the apolipoprotein E4 gene. It's a mouthful, but the important thing about that gene is it's very prevalent. About 25% of people in this room, 25% of people in every row probably, carries that gene. That means it increases your risk for developing Alzheimer's by about 2 to 3-fold, and it lowers your age of onset of developing Alzheimer's by about 10 years. So instead of normally getting it around 75, you would get it around 65 years of age if you had that gene. So let's set that aside. There's a second, even more deadly form of Alzheimer's disease called familial early onset Alzheimer's disease. That strikes about 3% of all Alzheimer's families. So there are roughly about 200,000 such families in the United States and about 1 million such families worldwide. So familial Alzheimer's disease is a great example of hundreds, if not thousands, of familial diseases that strike families worldwide. So familial Alzheimer's disease, there are 3 genes that have been identified. These genetic mutations are deterministic. That means if you inherit one from each one of your parents, or you inherit one from either one of your parents, there's a 100% chance you're going to get Alzheimer's disease. And familial early onset Alzheimer's disease, unlike the late onset form, strikes you in the prime of your life. It can strike you in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. Right when you're getting ready to plan a family, when you're in the prime of your job, when you're getting ready to raise your children. This is the deadliest, probably, form of a brain disease that you can think of. So let's assume that you are a 26 or a 27-year-old man or woman with a family history of familial Alzheimer's disease. You know that it's been running in your family. You have 2 options. Should you test yourself for the gene or not? And then let's say you test yourself for the gene. You turn out negative, that's great. You know, it's a big relief because there's only a 50% chance of passing it on from one parent to the son or daughter. So it's not a 100% chance of passing it on, but once you do get the gene from a parent, then you have a 100% chance of getting the disease. Let's say you test yourself and you find yourself to be positive. There's no cure for it. It's fatal. But does that mean that you should not have children? So most women or young men who are planning a family who have a familial genetic disorder face this struggle. They either decide, I'm not going to have a child, or they take a chance and conceive a pregnancy naturally, and then they may have to terminate the child if they find that the child has the gene upon prenatal testing. The third option is they can adopt. Now, so until about 10 years ago, those were the only options people had. So it was a relatively simple solution. Most of them either conceived naturally and took a chance, or they adopted, or they didn't have children. But now there is a new genetic technique, and there's several new ones. I'm going to talk about one new genetic technique called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, where you can actually do in vitro fertilization. You can select a series of eggs from the woman. You can select the healthiest sperm from the man. There's actually a video that I didn't bring today. There's some very cool tests where you can take a man's sperm and put it through like the equivalent of a 400-meter relay and select the most healthy sperm. I might have been kicked out of Duke if I had shown that, but... And then you can fertilize the healthiest sperm with the healthiest egg. You can actually test these eggs genetically, and then once they form an embryo, all this is done outside it's called in vitro fertilization. And then what you can do, you can test the healthiest eggs and the healthiest embryos and see ones that are free of that genetic mutation, reimplant them back in the mother, and the mother can have a healthy baby. But this raises a lot of issues because it's not covered by insurance. It might cost $40,000, $50,000. At least in the US, it's not covered by insurance. Which means the rich can have, great babies that are free of the disease. The poor are left with bad choices. So let me show you one video. We published a case a couple of weeks ago in JAMA Neurology that illustrates some of these issues.
Good morning. 30-year-old Amanda Kolinsky was faced with an unenviable decision: risk passing on a fatal brain disease to her children or give up on her dream of having children. But as you'll see, modern medicine offered a third option that would change everything.
I'll help you. There you go.
Unlike most people her age, Amanda Kolinsky knows in all likelihood how and when she'll die.
What the future holds for me is probably not very pretty. As far as the ending goes.
When Amanda's around 50 years old, doctors believe she'll be stricken with a neurologic disorder called Gerstmann-Straussler-Schenker syndrome.
My father had it, as well as my grandfather and my uncle.
In fact, it's been in her family for 5 generations. Amanda's father, a doctor, died from it in 2010 after a 6-year battle.
It started with some balance issues. And then he started having trouble talking, and then he started having trouble swallowing and eating, and then he became bedridden. As you can imagine, it was awful.
Amanda decided to get tested to see if she would face the same fate.
I was talking to my physician and my genetic counselor, and I remember hearing him saying, "Amanda, I'm sorry," and then I don't remember anything after. I just remember screaming, and then that's it.
She told her then boyfriend of 5 years she'd understand if he wanted out.
I had seen what kind of death and what kind of illness I would go through, and it's awful. I said, I completely understand. If you just want to go away.
It was not something that was even an option for me. We were in this together. I loved her. I love her. It was something that we were going to figure out together.
He proposed the very next day. They knew they wanted kids, but Amanda had a 50% chance of passing on the same gene mutation that's plagued her family for so many years. Svetlana Rachitsky is laboratory director at the Reproductive Genetics Institute in Chicago.
Unfortunately, we can't cure a patient, but we can prevent passing these genes to next generation.
She used pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD, to screen Amanda's embryos for the bad genes.
PGD was, to us, the only option. Taking that 50-50 chance was never something that we considered.
Using IVF, doctors were able to implant only healthy embryos. Amanda gave birth to twins Ava and Cole in 2011 and had a son Tatum last year.
What we have been through is an option that's out there that could completely eradicate diseases like this.
PGD has been around for years, but it's still a developing science. Researchers say this is the first time it's been used to screen for this type of condition. There are people who question whether someone who knows they might have a premature death is in a good position to have children.
It doesn't matter how I die. It doesn't matter how I look tomorrow. It's the now. It's what they learn now and what I teach them now that's going to affect them in the future.
Experts say people with neurologic disorders similar to Amanda's are also candidates for PGD, and it's already being used for certain forms of hereditary cancer and other conditions. But as the science advances, ethical questions about when and where to draw the line when it comes to picking and choosing only the healthiest embryos. Critics say it can become a slippery slope.
So I think that case is very clear-cut, but it raises a couple of questions. You know, if Amanda's parents had chosen to use this technique, then Amanda wouldn't have been born herself. So that's one. The second, as I pointed out, it's not covered by insurance. So should it be covered by insurance? The third question is, should everybody with a familial disease like this, if they are going to have children, should they be required to have it? And I'm using the word required in a very strong way for an intentional reason. If you take a condition like familial Alzheimer's disease, there are 100,000 people with familial Alzheimer's disease. And the average cost to society of caring for one person is $100,000. So that's $10 billion for caring for 100,000 people. If everybody potentially had pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to prevent that gene from being transmitted, you could virtually eliminate the disease. Of course, there would be some spontaneous mutation cases, but you would eliminate the vast majority of these cases. And then, how about other less severe diseases? Should we be using this technology for improving IQ? Should we be using this technology for late onset Alzheimer's disease? I mentioned to you there is this one gene that increases the risk twofold or threefold. Where do you draw the line? And last week, the FDA discussed an even more advanced technique, which is called intracytoplasmic transfer, which is mixing genetic material from 3 different individuals to create a baby. So, like I said, you know the movie Gattaca. I think when we saw it 15 or 20 years ago, it looked very futuristic, very science fictionistic, but the future is here. So there are a number of ethical issues, and I have 3 questions that I'd love to get a sense from the audience. These are poll questions, so maybe people can just raise their hands. And the first one is, I think, familial Alzheimer's disease, I've already told you, is a fatal brain disorder. It's caused by a faulty gene mutation, and a mother has a 50% chance of passing on this gene. Should all such individuals be allowed to conceive naturally and have a 50% chance of passing on the gene and coming, giving birth to someone potentially with a gene that might lead to dementia? So should such individuals be allowed to conceive naturally? And maybe people can raise their hands for a yes. How many people would agree with yes? How many people would say no, such individuals should not be allowed? Okay, so only a minority. The vast majority would allow reproductive freedom to individuals, and I think that's how it should be. The second question is, if there was a new procedure that was developed, and it's already here, PGD, for example, becomes available that allows women with familial Alzheimer's disease to conceive healthy children, should couples with familial Alzheimer's disease be required to undergo this procedure if they wish to conceive children? So how many people would say yes to this question? I just see a couple. How many people would say no? So again, the vast majority of people want complete reproductive liberty. They want people to conceive however they wish. And the third question is, if a new PGD genetic profiling procedure becomes available that allows parents to conceive babies with a higher than normal IQ, and there are already genes we know that are responsible for mental retardation, for example, so you can select out those genes. Should the government allow couples to have such children using this procedure? So how many people would say yes? How many people would say no? Okay, I think this is much more of an even split. So it sounds like this is I think this is what the future is probably going to look like. But clearly, I think we need guidelines. We need sort of to define appropriate use criteria. And I think we need to make sure that we don't create inequality just based on economic reasons. So clearly, I think this is an emerging area, and I wanted to make sure that people were aware of it, especially since there are a lot of students here who may be thinking of getting married and having children in the next 10 to 15 years. So with that, thank you for your attention. And thank you.